Good? Oh, yeah, it works. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our session today. I'm really excited about today's session. We're hoping this is going to be really interactive and engaging. You can ask questions to our wonderful panel here, but first you got to listen to me talk a little bit. So bear with me; it's going to get better. Thank you for attending the Clean Transportation, Reducing Vehicle Miles Traveled, and Ensuring Environmental Justice session. I'm Jen Weiss. I'm a senior advisor for climate change policy here at the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And today's discussion will explore some of the more important aspects of our transportation future. We've been talking a lot about that over the entire summit, and we really want to dig into some elements of that today. We want to look at how our transition to different modes of transportation and different land use options will help to reduce vehicle miles traveled and advance clean transportation. This session will also explore what the future can look like and how we might be able to get there. We intend for this to be a very two-way conversation that is both informative and interactive. So as we're talking, please get those questions lined up in your head because we'll be giving you lots of opportunity to ask those questions. Before we start, I'd like to encourage each of you to engage, or I've already said that, so we're going to keep going. I'm hoping that all of you, this is what happens when I have notes. Sorry, I start to go off them, so I apologize to you guys in advance. I'm hoping you all have downloaded the app because there's a poll on that app that you can use to answer a question that we'll do in just a second. So if you haven't, I recommend you do so today. You can access event details, the schedule, and more information about the sponsors. There's also a game in the app, and you can win prizes. So make sure that you look at that game and sign up for that. To access the app, to visit your app store and search CVent Events, that's CVENT Events. And from there, you can open the app and search the 2023 North Carolina Transportation Summit. For this session, please hold your questions until the end. But like I said, we're going to give you plenty of time to ask your questions. There will also be a poll question during this panel that you will find on the app where you see the session listed. So once you get into the app, click on this session, and down at the bottom, there's a view poll that you can take that poll. You can take it right now. You can take it later, but definitely take that poll at some point during the session because we'd love to get your feedback. So now we're going to go ahead and get started. First, a little bit about me. As the Senior Advisor for Climate Change Policy, I oversee the climate-related transportation activities at North Carolina Department of Transportation. So that includes the Clean Transportation Plan, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, as well as things like the NEVI, the National EV Infrastructure Funding that the NCDOT is getting to advance infrastructure along our interstates and highways. So I am happy that you are here today joining in the discussion. Transportation is faced with a lot of changes in the coming years, and reducing vehicle miles traveled, it will certainly have lasting impacts on our industry, our citizens, our air, and our quality of life. So it's a really, really important topic, and we want to make sure that we are all discussing it and thinking through all of the impacts that it can have. Today, we have three panelists to help foster a discussion on these impacts. But before we hear from them, let's bring that poll question up. I'm hoping you guys can all get to it. It can be found in the app, and go ahead and take the poll. The poll question is, in your opinion, what initiative is likely to have the greatest impact on reducing vehicle miles traveled in North Carolina? And there's 5 different responses. I will not read them, but please go through those and think about what you think will have the greatest impact. We encourage you to use that app. There's no wrong answer. So please select what you think will be the most, we'll talk later, will have the most impact on reducing VMTs. Or you can vote after, like I said before. Feel free to vote as you're listening to our panelists convince you of different options, apparently. And we're going to take a look at all those responses as we close out the session. So now I'd like to have this time to introduce our session and our panelists. Today's panelists joining me on stage are Damon Siles. He's from the mayor of Carborough. And for those of you that don't know Carborough, it's this cute little town that's about 45 minutes to the west of us near Chapel Hill, but its own town. So I don't want to put you too close to Chapel Hill, but definitely worth visiting if you haven't visited it before. Also with us today in the middle is Dr. Virginia Goodry, who is the branch head for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Occupational and Environmental Epidemiology Branch. And if she can put all that on her business card, I'm going to be really, really impressed. And last, but certainly not least, is Olatunji Obayi Reed. Mr. Reed is the president and CEO of Equiticity. Did I say that right? Equiticity Racial Equity Movement. And he's coming here from Chicago. We're really thrilled that he can join us today and bring his perspective to the discussion. So I'm going to try to pull up my slides real quick here. Hopefully. Yes. Okay. I already introduced the panelists, so I wanted to kick it off by talking a little bit about what vehicle miles traveled are and why we're thinking of reducing them. Some of you might be very familiar with it, some of you might not. So I wanted to make sure I laid a little bit of groundwork before we dug into the topic. It should come as no surprise that the number of vehicle miles traveled, or we like to lovingly call it VMT, so if you hear me say that, that's what I mean, in the United States has been increasing over the years. And this can be for a variety of reasons. Obviously, our population is growing. We have a large number of vehicles on the road, but also Americans love to travel. So we certainly like to get around in our vehicles and we like to move around. So knowing this, in August of 2019, the North Carolina Department of Transportation began the facilitation of a VMT reduction task force and a VMT reduction study. So we actually had a consultant come in and look at the vehicle miles traveled within the state and give us suggestions and alternatives for how we might reduce the number of miles that are traveled in our vehicles. The study identified strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled in urban areas, in rural areas, and in regional areas of North Carolina. The final study was released in 2021, and it is available on our website for anyone that hasn't seen it and wants to. It is a great resource for organizations considering methods to reduce VMT in their areas. So why is it important that we focus on the reduction of vehicle miles traveled? Well, there's obviously environmental health impacts and benefits from that, right? As we get out of our vehicles, we have less emissions from those vehicles that can reduce greenhouse gases, improve the air, and just increase our overall health of our society. There's also fewer automobile deaths. The less vehicles on the road, the less automobile accidents, and the less deaths that might occur. So certainly that is something that we want to have as a beneficial impact of reducing VMT. And then also it provides a way for us to have a more accessible society as we think about getting out of our cars and getting into other modes of transportation or even walking and biking. These are ways that we can start to think about accessing our society, accessing all the things we want to do in a different way and maybe in a more impactful way. So I wanted to share a couple graphs with you, and I hope they're not too small, but you can kind of see the basic trend of what I'm describing. The graph on the left is the total VMT in the US and North Carolina. So you can see the numbers have been increasing. The orange line is the United States, and the blue line is North Carolina. So between 2003 and 2019, annual vehicle miles traveled in the US grew by 13%, from 2.89 trillion miles to 3.26 trillion miles. So certainly you can see that trend upward. During that same period, VMT in North Carolina grew from 93.7 billion to 123.1 billion, an overall increase of 31%. So, I've been talking about the population increase in North Carolina. We know we're growing. We know there's more people coming to our state, and those people bring their vehicles, and that obviously is going to lead to an increase in the vehicle miles traveled. In total, the state's VMT increase in this period covered nearly 8% of the country's total VMT growth. So we're really certainly kind of driving the US increases as well. The vehicle miles traveled per capita, which is the slide that you see on your right, peaked in the United States in 2004 and a year later for North Carolina. So we're trying to capture here how many vehicle miles each of us individually are traveling on average. After the 2004, there were decreases in VMT per capita. This is likely due to the economic downturn from the Great Recession. And we will probably see, this graph doesn't go out that far, but we'll probably see similar things from the pandemic as more people started to stay home and not drive as much. Prior to the downturn, though, the VMT per capita have been steadily growing over 2 decades in the United States and North Carolina. So this is a trend that we're seeing go upward, and we certainly want to think about ways that we can start to reduce that number, start having those lines go down. The last the fact, I guess, that I'll leave you with is that VMT per capita grew again after 2013, surpassing 9,800 miles in the United States and 11,600 miles in North Carolina in 2017. So you can see in North Carolina, our vehicle miles traveled per capita is greater than the average for the United States. We travel a lot more than others do in other states. Another reason for increased VMT is the mode of travel that we use to commute to work and school. This graph compares from 2019 commuter modes of travel, so how they were traveling to work or to school, as reported by the U.S. Bureau of Transportation Statistics for North Carolina. So as you can see, that really large orange piece is people that were driving alone to work. That's over 80% of us drive to work in our car, single occupancy. This is more than the U.S. as a whole and of any of the other median states and districts. Transit followed a similar trend. 11% of commuters use transit in North Carolina compared to 5% nationally. So that's good for us. We're using a little bit more transit on average than other states are. And a positive trend in North Carolina in terms of VMT is that the percent of commuters who worked from home in North Carolina was more than in the nation. 6.7% of commuters in North Carolina worked from home, while only 5.7 worked from home nationally. So certainly this is a trend that I think has continued through the pandemic and even after the pandemic as well. Many of you probably work from home or do hybrid working. So I'm going to jump really quickly before I turn it over to our great speakers and talk a little bit about some more recent conversations we've had about VMT. Some of you might be aware that in January of last year, 2022, Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 246. And one of the things that executive order asked the Department of Transportation to do was to develop a clean transportation plan for the state. So we have, over the last year, been working with a really large group of stakeholders and different work groups to really dig into different ways that we can reduce emissions in the state and to improve air quality and improve the quality of life across the board. You can see the 5 different work groups here. I'm not going to talk about each. You're welcome. Happy to anytime after this. But the one I want to point your attention to is one of the 5 work groups was a VMT work group. And we had 70 people, I think, signed up for that work group that came monthly to talk to us about different challenges that they see with vehicle miles traveled, and then also some of the opportunities that they see. And we're going to pull from all of that and put it into our clean transportation plan. Just a summary of the work that was done across all 5 of those work groups. We had 30 meetings, so each of the work groups met once a month for 6 months. We had over 220 participants across all of the work groups and over 3,300 different solutions, comments, ideas. I'm smiling because that's great. We'd love to have all these comments, but now we have to refine those and take them down to some manageable number that we can all work together to move forward. And that we are in the process of doing that right now with our consultant, which is Kimley Horn. Want to point your attention to the pieces on the right. We were really intentional about the things we wanted to think about and discuss as we were thinking through our solutions. And so you can see those 6 different cross-cutting themes that we considered as we were going through each of the work groups. Equitable access to clean mobility options. We wanted to make sure that everything that we were suggesting, all of our solutions had equity in mind and that everyone would be able to use the solutions we were proposing. Education and outreach is a huge component, especially with VMT. What are the different options available? How do you use them? And how can we make improvements? Incentives and financing. What are the incentives or different funding options that we may need to put in place in order to move some of our solutions forward? What are the economic and workforce development opportunities? One of the things I hope we talk to the panel about today are what are the workforce development opportunities of vehicle miles traveled reduction strategies? And that was certainly a topic across all of the different work groups. The health impacts is important. As I said before, one of the reasons we want to reduce vehicle miles traveled is to improve the air quality and improve our health. So that was definitely a huge component of considering the different solutions. And finally, what are the policies and programs that might need to be put in place for any of this to happen? So that whether that's regulatory, legislative, or other. I wanted to think through what needs to be done in the state in order to make this all move forward. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about the Clean Transportation Plan, but I did want to introduce a little bit more deeply each of our great panelists, and then they're going to get up and talk to you a little bit about what they do and their solutions. So Damon Siles is the mayor of Carborough in Orange County, as I said before. He presides over meetings of the town council and has championed public transportation, improvements to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and urban planning that seeks housing and access for everyone. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Virginia Goodry, who is head of the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Occupational and Environmental Epidemiology Branch, and is on the Clean Transportation Plan Advisory Board with me, so thank you for that. And finally, last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Obayi Reed. Mr. Reed is the founder, president, and chief executive officer of Equicity, a racial equity movement. By the time we're done, I'll get that right. I promise. All right. So first, we're going to lead off with Mr. Siles. And that's the wrong one. All right. It's all you.
Thanks, Jeff. Get myself set up here. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all here. I am Damon Siles, the mayor of Carrboro. I also represent the town of Carrboro on our MPO board, the Durham Chapel Hill Carrboro MPO. And so I just want to recognize that a couple of our other board members are here, including our chair, Mayor Jen Weaver from Hillsborough, and council member Michael Parker from the town of Chapel Hill. And somewhere in these corridors is our new executive director at the MPO, Doug Plashinsky. I hope you'll get a chance to meet with him and talk about our priorities here in our part of the triangle. So thanks again to Jen Weiss for the introduction. As Jen mentioned, Carrboro is the cute little town next to Chapel Hill. We are inevitably and always described as the cute little town next to Chapel Hill. And we're usually okay with that. Those of you who have been to our two towns know that we're really one larger community. And in fact, if you visited Carrboro and Chapel Hill, you probably have a hard time knowing whether you're standing in downtown Chapel Hill or downtown Carrboro. We're that close together. We sit on the western edge of the triangle, and we're joined together by our fare-free transit system, fare-free for now 20 years and counting. We're joined by a certain public university that is one of the largest employers in the region. And we are joined by, I think, a social and cultural and historical legacy that we like to think is unique in the triangle. So I'm really glad to be here representing Carrboro and the larger Western Triangle in that way. So in her introduction, Jen looked forward to hearing some perspectives about how, at least in the prompt I was given, although you didn't say these words, so I'll cheat a little bit here, but the prompt I was given, how reducing VMT will affect land use across North Carolina. But I want to flip that a little bit, or really flip it entirely. I want to stress how important it is that we consider how our land use decisions affect VMT. Without land use policies, land use decisions, land use patterns that promote compact, walkable, transit-oriented forms of development, we will not reduce vehicle miles traveled in North Carolina. So like the rest of the triangle, we in Orange County are experiencing growth pressure, to say the least, which is driving up property values, driving up rents, driving up housing costs. But at the local level, most of our communities are still making our land use decisions under complex, suburban-oriented zoning and land use codes that were written decades ago. Today in Carrboro and in Chapel Hill and Durham and other places, it's easier to build a new residential subdivision that is reachable only by car than it is to build a compact, mixed-use, transit-oriented project that's reachable by foot, by bicycle, or by bus. It's easier to tear down a modest home in a centrally located neighborhood in our towns and replace it with a large, less affordable home than it is to build two modest homes on the same lot, or to build a quadplex, or to add an accessory dwelling unit. So as more people move to the triangle, they encounter a land use pattern, a transportation infrastructure, and policymaking decisions that encourage driving as the primary or only travel mode. So what do? They drive. We drive. At the state level, resources available for making lasting, substantial changes in non-highway infrastructure are paltry compared to those for road widening, intersection and interchange, so-called improvements, and other projects that reinforce driving as the best and only travel mode. And so we see this in the data. Jen shared with you some of the data about VMT over the last several years. I think a point I really want to get in here, though, about those graphs you showed, and one that's not quite reflected in the graphs you showed, but which is just as true, is that VMT is outpacing population growth in North Carolina and in the Triangle. It's not just that it's growing and that the population's growing, but VMT is outpacing growth in population. So this challenge requires solutions at the local level, solutions at the regional level, and dare I say, solutions at the state level. I prepared some slides just to offer some examples of what we've been up to in Carrboro. Certainly other communities, I'm thinking especially of Chapel Hill, our neighbors, Durham, Raleigh, and others have already been doing some really inspiring, cool things with their zoning ordinances that I hope we'll emulate in Carrboro to expand housing opportunities, which will have a result, an impact on VMT. But I'm from Carrboro, so I'm going to talk about Carrboro. And I'll see if I can do that here. So last year, the Carrboro Town Council adopted the town's first ever comprehensive plan. We call it Carrboro Connects. Carrboro Connects is meant to guide our decision-making about the big issues over the next 20 years, things like growth and development, affordable housing, climate action, and so on. Indeed, the plan is built on what we call the foundational themes of race and equity and climate action. And so all of the goals and strategies outlined in this document are informed by those themes. The plan is divided into several interrelated planning elements. I'm showing you here sort of some introductory commentary from the transportation and mobility planning element, which is expressed in terms of achieving these goals around equity and climate action. I'm not going to read through all these slides. I've prepared several, but they're really just for visual interest, I guess. The land use planning element is similarly framed in those terms, and I will read the material on this slide just to give you some grounding in what our land use planning is trying to achieve as we begin implementing this plan. The land use element aims to address race and equity through overcoming barriers that have been created in the past and to open doors to new opportunities for advancing equity through the use of land. The built environment is a fundamental aspect of daily lives that can enhance a sense of well-being for all individuals. And I think we're going to hear a lot today about well-being. That's why we're here. This chapter includes specific recommendations to increase the supply of affordable housing by promoting more intensive use of land, proactively identifying land for affordable housing, and providing new or refined zoning tools to support affordable housing. And this, I think, is especially apt for us today. Additionally, coordinating development in areas with transit access and walkable environments can not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also reduce costs to make housing and commercial space more affordable. So in these next few slides, I've just pulled out a few of the strategies that are identified in this land use element of the plan to show how explicit we've tried to make the link between land use and mobility, and therefore equity and the environment. And I'm just going to kind of cycle through these relatively quickly. You can see here, looking to preserve and promote availability of affordable housing along key corridors. And we typically mean by that transit corridors. So neighborhoods and other parts of town that are near transit, near existing and planned transit are where we want to focus increases in residential density. So you'll see here again, especially along transit routes and in areas that are walking distance to amenities. Identifying opportunities for redevelopment so that we're preserving natural spaces while increasing residential and commercial density in the urban core. Focus on connectivity between parks through bike facilities, sidewalks, and other modes. And again, just echoing the same theme throughout here, that we're focused on redevelopment and new development in areas that have existing and planned transit service. And then each of these planning elements in the comp plan has a section that relates that element to the other elements in the plan. So explicitly here, tying land use to mobility and transportation. So at the regional level, I mentioned that I represent the town of Carrboro on the DCHC MPO, Durham Chapel Carrboro MPO, which represents the western half of the triangle, in close partnership with our counterparts in Campo here on the eastern side of the triangle. We've also been trying to steer the ship in a different direction. Some of you may be familiar with the discussions that led to our adoption last year of our 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. We wanted to start changing the conversation in that plan about long-range planning, place greater emphasis on accessible, multimodal, affordable transportation modes and networks, and less emphasis on expanding roadways and vehicle throughput. As that plan says, this is the 2050 MTP for the region. One clear message from both elected official discussion and public engagement during the development of Connect 2050, which is what we call that plan, is that roadways need to be designed and engineered with much greater care than has been typical in the past, using more flexible and context-sensitive standards that have now been successfully implemented in many places, mostly places outside of North Carolina, which is why I'm really glad to hear from Mr. Reed today. Especially in urban and urbanizing locations, design should prioritize steady, safe, reliable, moderate speed travel rather than emphasize high speed travel. Our newly adopted MTP also emphasizes increased mobility options for all communities, ensuring that all people have access to multimodal and affordable transportation choices, enhancing transit services, improving pedestrian and bike facilities, and promoting safety, health, and well-being. Another effort that we've undertaken recently in DCHC MPO and with our partners at Campo is to adopt several joint policy priorities for the region. And this is just a screenshot of a little collection of those. There are 7 priorities in particular that we've identified as part of those joint policy priorities that are listed here, and 3 in particular that I'll highlight because we've made out specific kind of fact sheets and advocacy materials for our group to use when we're advocating on these priorities. The first is Invest for Success, as we call it, which is about creating more dedicated recurring state transportation funds for matching competitive federal funds and other sources. The other one that we've put some attention into is making North Carolina a leader in active transportation options. And this includes increasing, I hope, greater attention to the NCDOT Complete Streets policy and getting that policy fully implemented, as well as our safe routes to school. I see some applause in the background there. Thank you. Yeah, Complete Streets, yay. Also, safe routes to school, which is in need of additional support and funding at the state level to really, I think, can make a really big impact on commuting to school for our kids. And then this third one that we put some emphasis on is strengthening the work around transportation demand management, and in particular things like incentives for employers to get their employees into work without using single occupancy vehicles. So finally, I think it's important to say, I've talked about a little bit of local stuff, some of the regional work we're doing. I think it's important to say that action at the state level is critical to helping us achieve our goals, both here in the Triangle and throughout North Carolina. There are several small legislative changes that could be made to the Strategic Transportation Investments Law, but there are, and I won't go into those, but there are a handful of key administrative reforms that could be pursued today without legislative intervention that would help reduce VMT, reduce emissions, improve mobility, et cetera. So one of those administrative reforms would be for NCDOT to change or replace its level of service analysis, the analysis it uses to evaluate projects and design changes. Because of the level of service analysis focusing on delay for drivers, primarily at intersections, it produces designs that increase capacity for drivers, which induces more driving and reduces safety and comfort for pedestrians and other users. A focus on level of service analysis is inconsistent with the Complete Streets policy that I just mentioned, and I think a better approach would prioritize VMT reduction and safety. A second administrative reform would be to adjust the normalization percentages that are used in the prioritization process of the Strategic Transportation Investments Law. The current percentages lead to more than 90% of the budget being dedicated solely to highway projects. Adjusting these percentages significantly and gradually would ensure that more funding is allocated to non-highway projects and over time expand transportation options to more multimodal solutions. What's important here is that this normalization approach in the STI law, in the process that we use at NCDOT and in the MPOs and so on, is not set in statute. It's fully within the administration's power through the prioritization work group to improve it. And finally, a third administrative reform would be for the work group to adjust the project scoring criteria in a way that would prioritize investments in multimodal approaches and reduce driving. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of our panel. I'll leave it here and just say that just like Carrboro and Chapel Hill are really one community, I think it's fair to say that we're joined with the rest of the Triangle in one single metro area, a metro region. And I believe we have responsibilities and opportunities for action at the local level, regional level, and state level to enable all of our residents to move around this one metro region in ways that enable greater access to jobs, education, services, cultural opportunities, using modes that are affordable and accessible to everyone, that minimize environmental impacts and promote health and well-being. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mayor Stiles. And thank you for, I forgot to mention that he has been very active on the VMT work group as part of the Clean Transportation Plan. So thank you for all of your work there. So next up is Dr. Virginia Goodry. And let me get her slides up real quick. All right, I have lost the mouse there. That's not you. So I think I mentioned before that Dr. Goodry is part of our advisory board for the Clean Transportation Plan, but what you might not know is she's also the environmental justice lead for the Department of Health and Human Services. So she's just a wealth of information, and so really looking forward to your talk. Thanks.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Virginia Guidry, and again, I'm the branch head for Occupational and Environmental Epidemiology at the Department of Health and Human Services. It used to be that no one knew what an epidemiologist was. Now people do because of a little something called COVID-19. So in my work, though, I look at environmental causes of health problems and also occupational causes of health problems, which are sort of a side part of environmental issues. And so that has led me to be very engaged in transportation-related issues because of the health impacts there. And so one of the things that I want to bring today is that health perspective, share a brief amount of the knowledge about those health impacts, and then also talk some about environmental justice considerations. Which communities are most impacted by air pollution? And thus we need to pay more attention to those communities when we're trying to solve those problems. Okay, so I just want to start with a figure that just summarizes the health impacts of air pollution because they are many. And I will just start by saying back in the early 2000s, when I started working on my PhD and I was looking at air pollution effects actually from livestock operations here in North Carolina, I started looking into the health literature around air pollution, and I was amazed at the amount of evidence that there is showing how much air pollution impacts health. And this slide is just a quick summary of that. And I just want to give you a few highlights of that so that you know that as you are doing your work and you are trying to reduce the emissions in many, many ways, there are many ways to do that, it is having health impacts. And we can really improve health by reducing the air pollution that we are generating. So just, a couple of highlights. And on this slide, you can see many different health impacts highlighted, but they're actually color-coded a little bit by the strength of the evidence. And so those that have red dots next to them are the ones that have the strongest evidence. So air pollution impacts all-cause mortality. That's when you lump all causes of death together and you see whether exposure to air pollution is influential on that. And yes, the answer is absolutely yes. All-cause mortality is influenced by air pollution. The two others there, circulatory mortality and ischemic heart disease, are just referring to, constriction of blood vessels, either in the heart or in the brain, like strokes. And, those are our major causes of death. Air pollution contributes to that. And the whole reason that we have the policies we do, like Clean Air Act, like various policies to reduce air pollution, is in part because of the scientific evidence that shows how it impacts health. And those are some of the major ways. People think about respiratory issues, which are also really important, but it's actually those cardiovascular issues that are most strongly connected. The risk of heart attack goes up when you have an increase in air pollution. So these are the things that we need to consider. In addition to that, with a little bit weaker evidence, but still strong, we have lung cancer mortality, asthma onset in both adults and children, and acute lower respiratory infections. There was some work looking at COVID-19 and how exposure to air pollution might increase your vulnerability to COVID-19 because your lungs are compromised by that air pollution that you're breathing. And that asthma onset is really important because I can assure you that everyone in this room knows someone with asthma. It's very common. In North Carolina, it's about 1 in 10 children have asthma to some degree. And we know that our air pollution exposures are contributing to that development of asthma. And so it's something that we have to pay close attention to. Some of the other causes that I want to point out here, or the associations I want to point out here, are related to birth outcomes. The evidence is not quite as strong for birth outcomes, but we do see that when women are exposed to air pollution during pregnancy, on average, they will have smaller babies. And that's showing that their growth of the babies is being restricted somewhat. And there's evidence of that. Some of these studies are attenuated a little bit because smoking also has an impact, similar, exposure if you kind of think about it. So, important to balance those things out, but just taking a look here at all these different health outcomes and how air pollution impacts them. So this is the stage that I want to set. Also, just on shifting consideration to environmental justice for a second. So this is just a statewide map for anyone who's maybe not as familiar with North Carolina's network of highways. So you can just kind of visualize for a second where the biggest highways are in North Carolina and what communities might be impacted by the vehicles that are traveling on these highways. And when we talk about air pollution contributors, of course, individual cars and trucks that folks are driving are a major contributor, but also the medium and heavy duty vehicles that are running diesel engines are also very important contributors that we need to try to limit in our work. So I wanted you to see that. And then from an environmental justice perspective, though, looking at this scale is not enough. You really have to get on a much lower scale. And so this is a shot that's from the CDC new environmental justice index that the CDC has put out. And what you can see there on the left is just, it's a map of the environmental justice measures. This is in the Charlotte area. So it's basically kind of looking around in the Charlotte community. You can see that some neighborhoods have a higher environmental justice index. That means they have lower socioeconomic status, potentially higher communities of color, and then also higher health impacts. So that's all combined here. And the darker colors are those with the higher environmental justice index. So that's on the left. On the right, you can see the PM 2.5, the particulate matter that's smaller than 2.5 microns in diameter, which is a major contributor to health impacts from air pollution. And you can just see that there's some variability there too. And as an epidemiologist, one of the things that we do on our teams is we think about, okay, where are we seeing those air pollutants? Where are we seeing the health impacts? And then also that layer of environmental justice. Which are the communities that are most impacted by that? How do we make sure that we are paying attention to those communities and trying to provide resources and policies that are increasing the availability of cleaner transit in those communities so that we can reduce the air pollution there. And that's part of what the Clean Transportation Plan is trying to do, is trying to think about that with that equity focus as we set up policies in North Carolina. And with that, I will stop with my intro and I look forward to the discussion and questions with you all. And I really thank you for attending the session today.
All right, thank you, Dr. Goodry. And I will switch over to Obaid's. All right. Sorry. Yes, you have to deal with me and my technology differences. So it is my pleasure to introduce Obai Reed to you. In his role with Equiticity, Racial Equity Movement, Mr. Reed and his organization work to improve the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people through research, advocacy, and events to help build social infrastructure and break down the barriers to sustainable transportation. He is most proud of his work to create a coalition of people, organizations, and businesses that work together to achieve racial equity, and what he calls mobility justice in Chicago. So I'm really grateful that he traveled all the way to Chicago to be here with us today. I'm really excited to learn more. Welcome. Uh-oh. Okay, hold on. Sorry, this is my fault, not his. No. That one. That was. There you are. All right. Okay. Now.
Awesome. Thank you. Hello. How y'all doing? New policies, new systems, new moves. Reimagining transportation for racially marginalized communities. My name is Obai. Here's my contact information. And inside of this presentation are some links. Should you want to see this presentation, have some time to be with the presentation and also connect with those links, you could go to that presentation link, eqty.info/new policies NCDOT. Equiticity is a racial equity movement operationalizing racial equity by harnessing our collective power to improve the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in our society. Our vision is to help establish a U.S. city where racial equity is fully operationalized at the policy and legislative levels to ensure that every resource under the city's purview has a racial equity lens that determines how those resources are distributed at the city level. First thing I want to talk about is the need for new policies. We don't leave a commitment to racial equity to people with good hearts. Good hearts and warm bodies come and go. Shifting political winds come and go. Goofy smiles and awkward handshakes come and go. We policy a commitment to racial equity. We legislate a commitment to racial equity. And these policies will help us ensure that that commitment is more long-lasting and more durable. So a few of the policies. One is our Equiticity Racial Equity Statement of Principle. In this framework, we define and envision racial equity. We describe the guiding principles which make up a full-throated, unflinching commitment to racial equity. The next one is the Untokening Principles of Mobility Justice. The Untokening is an organization based in the U.S. that's doing the best work in the country around helping people understand what is mobility justice. What does that commitment to mobility justice look like? The next one is the Principles of Environmental Justice. This framework was created mostly by Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in the early 90s. They did a retreat in DC and they came out of that retreat with this framework. It is a powerful framework which should determine how we are executing against environmental justice in this country. The next one is the Just Transition Framework, which explores how do we move Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities across this spectrum that we're going to go through to get to a place where our society is more sustainable and our communities are not being harmed. And in fact, we're benefiting from this transition. And the final one is the Community Engagement to Ownership Spectrum. What this framework is espousing is the need to create community ownership at the neighborhood level for the planning processes. So what I'm going to argue is the right people to lead the planning efforts in our neighborhoods must be from our neighborhoods. The right people who must lead the planning processes in our communities must be Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And that requires agencies to transfer power, resources, and decision-making to ensure that Black and Brown people are at the table engaging in the work to improve our neighborhoods. All right, I got to catch up here. Okay, we need new systems. We need new ways of operating. The first one I want to talk about is community mobility rituals. In our society, we focus, and this is a result of the US DOT and how they think about funding. This is a result of state DOTs and MPOs and DOTs at the city level. We give too much resources to hardware. The hardware is the physical infrastructure. And we give little to no resources to the software, the social infrastructure. So what I'm arguing here around community mobility rituals is the need to focus on the work that socializes people in our neighborhoods around other modes of travel. Equiticity hosts 5 types of rituals: community bicycle rides, neighborhood walking tours, public transit excursions, group scooter rolls, and open streets festivals. One of the reasons we call them rituals is because they have some elements in common that lend themselves to being ritualistic. And one of those elements is a rhythmic schedule. That rhythmic schedule, whether it's a bike ride every Friday night or a walking tour in the parks every second Sunday, that rhythmic schedule allows people to fit their lifestyle into the schedule of the rhythm, into the schedule of the ritual. And that rhythmic schedule allows for increased socialization at the neighborhood level. Some other systems that need to be implemented are e-bike libraries. Bike share doesn't work in our neighborhoods. Anybody want to challenge me on that? Bike share in this country is a European construct. It's a European model. And some of y'all in this room and others felt confident that that model could work in Black and brown neighborhoods. Every study I've looked at has showed that bike share leans middle to upper income, male, and some other characteristic that's not within respect to our neighborhoods. Bike share does not work. So what we're arguing for is e-bike libraries that are community owned, that nonprofits are running, and there's not a focus on profitability, there's a focus on equity. The next one is neighborhood mobility hubs. So there's some mobility hubs. There may be some in North Carolina. Are there mobility hubs here? I see some heads nodding. There's some mobility hubs around the country. They're more popular in Europe. When I talk about neighborhood mobility hubs, what I want to talk about is how do we reimagine what a mobility hub is in the context of being in our neighborhoods where the primary audience is Black and brown people living in a low to moderate income community and experiencing severe transportation inequities. For us, that reimagining includes 3 elements: hardware, so the physical infrastructure, the mobility devices; software, the socialization that we must do to socialize people around alternative modes of travel; and a physical building, a physical space where Black and brown people feel welcomed, connected, and are able to socialize and explore how do we grow our mobility in the face of a lot of adversities. The next model is free transit. You got free transit in your region. I'm happy for that. We need free transit across the board. We should not be charging people to get on transit. We want to reduce VMT, and we want people to pay for transit. We need free transit in our society. The next one is equitable transit-oriented development. So of course there are some concerns around TOD causing displacement and gentrification. So any work on TOD must be equitable. It must deal with how do we increase DOT and ensure that our neighborhoods are not going to be further marginalized and people are being pushed out as a result. The next one is closing the spatial mismatch. The disconnect between where the job seekers are and where the job centers are is vast. We must be thinking about transportation as helping close that gap and land use policies. And the next one is racially equitable traffic safety. You all have seen it here. We saw it in LA. The role of police in traffic safety is harmful in Black and brown neighborhoods. And should we want to reduce VMT, we have to reimagine how we make traffic safety a reality in our society that is racially equitable. The answer is not police enforcement. It's also not automated enforcement. Now, I know that's going to ruffle some feathers. New moves. What do we want to achieve as a result of this work? That's critical to understand because too often we implement these policies with no real clarity on what the benefits should be. Here's the benefits that we seek in our neighborhoods. We want to own the planning process. We don't want you coming in our neighborhoods and asking us to approve a plan that you wrote by yourself for the last year or two. We want to own that planning process. We want this work to reduce violence. There's 3 types of violence we focus on: interpersonal, vehicular, and police. In our neighborhoods, our number 1 concern is violence. We are so deeply concerned about violence that it shapes our mode choice. We feel compelled to own a car because we're confident it's the most safe way to move around our neighborhoods and our cities. The next one is to improve health and educational outcomes. You talked about that, Professor. The air quality, the lack of exercise. We should be thinking about your work improving health and educational outcomes. And then we want to also create jobs and economic opportunities in our neighborhoods. I saw somebody mentioned workforce development earlier. And the ultimate goal is to make our neighborhoods and cities more livable. We are not of the opinion that systems which harm us have an inherent right to exist. So in the case of a system that's harming our neighborhoods, our position is burn it down and build anew. One of my favorite people is Marlo Stanfield from HBO's The Wire. He once told somebody, you want it to be one way, but it's the other way. What happens when we turn on the power and equity moves like electricity through our homes, our streets, our neighborhoods, and our cities? Equiticity. Power plus equity is greater than. So what I want y'all to do as y'all leave here today, turn on the power and let equity flow. Thank you.
I feel like there was a mic drop there, so I'm not exactly sure I should be getting up right now. But I do have a couple of questions that I want to ask the panel. But I think at this point, I think you probably have a lot of questions that are percolating in your mind. So I really want to give you a chance. So I'm just going to start off with one, and then I'll open it up to all of you. So, and I think you all kind of touched on this as you did your opening remarks. But reducing vehicle miles traveled means a lot of different things to different people, and it can depend on an individual or community's needs and perspectives. So I'm curious, from each of your perspectives, what do you see as the greatest opportunity? I know you had a whole bunch of IU, but what's the greatest opportunity for reducing vehicle miles traveled and improving access to transportation opportunities in our communities? And Abayu, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think the greatest opportunity is the impact on health in our neighborhoods. We experience significant health inequities in Black and brown neighborhoods, from air quality to lack of active transportation to violence. All of that is happening in our neighborhoods. And I do see a role for reducing VMT in our neighborhoods and helping improve health outcomes. What worries me, and what I talked about earlier, is in the event we do the work to reduce VMT without thinking strategically about racial equity, mobility justice, environmental justice, there's some potential that we could see more harms in our neighborhoods. So we have to center these frameworks and these policies to ensure that we benefit and we're not going backwards.
I'll just underscore the health impacts there and considerations for reducing VMT. We just have to change how we think about our modes of transit. And, right now we think about what's most convenient. We think about what's going to get us there fastest. And we have to shift our thinking to, what are the impacts on the communities around me? What am I teaching my kids? How are we setting up habits in our lives? And so to me, when we are thinking about reducing VMT, it's thinking about the mindset, so that you can kind of open your mind to other modes of transit and think about other modes of transit. You don't always have to get there the fastest. What if you get some exercise along the way? What if you set up safe places for people to walk and ride their bikes so that they can do the same? I think we just have to shift the mindset there. And I know that is a big challenge.
I think I would identify an opportunity. The most important opportunity to me is stop over-investing in the modes that are most harmful, and begin truly investing, not in, as what I said, a paltry way, but in a real way. Begin investing in the modes that we know are healthier, that contribute to well-being, and provide access to more people who have limited resources and access now.
Thank you, all three of you. Really, really great responses. And I know there's so much more behind every one of those. So thank you. I want to open it up, see if there's any questions from the audience. I do have others, but if there's anyone that wants to ask a question, we'll start right here and then we'll work back. Oh. All right, I'll do the whole routine.
There's some light. Thank you all so much. This was an absolutely terrific panel. I think it gives us all a lot to think about and to carry our work forward. I think one of the things that I have been mulling over recently, especially with our work with our MPO and how we are really trying, as Damon mentioned, to create a different future, something that is more equitable, more climate friendly, all the things. And it is really hard. And what I don't think we lack is evidence. There's no lack of evidence that this would be better for our health, better for the environment, and better for our most marginalized communities. But it's so hard to break through that message to do something different. And so I'm wondering what thoughts you all have about how to illustrate that vision more clearly to people who are not already bought in to that vision.
Try that one.
Y'all want me to go first? Okay. A few things come to mind. You got to wrestle with who's the right messenger. And should we agree that the best messenger in our neighborhoods is people who live in our neighborhoods, then we need resources. We need resources to take ownership of this issue. We also need some capacity building to better understand the issue and understand why it's important in our neighborhoods. We need financial resources for us to play a leadership role in this work. I'm more confident that people in our neighborhoods will convince us that this is important than you. That's no disrespect to you. It's because our neighborhoods need to lead this work. And I'm also more confident when our neighborhoods champion the work that we'll be able to move the policymakers in a more effective way as well.
I really love the comments earlier about socializing people to new rituals. I think that part of that work in our local communities is about getting people used to other ways of being in our communities, in our local communities, in our neighborhoods. One of the things I mentioned, the Carborough Connects comprehensive plan a little bit earlier. One of the things that I found so compelling about the process we went through as a community in Carborough is that even though we were conducting the planning process or the engagement during the peak of the pandemic, we've had unprecedented levels, maybe because we were in the middle of the pandemic, frankly, but we had unprecedented levels of engagement from our own community in the planning and the development of that document, in the visioning and in the goal setting, which I think speaks to the importance of just living in where people are and understanding their priorities and letting that shape our priorities as policymakers. And I think that you're right, that that's what's going to ultimately convince our decision makers. But I think at the end of the day, also having to appeal to folks who aren't living that and have other priorities in other regions of the state that aren't the same as some of our more urban or urbanizing areas is important too. And understanding that the solutions that are available to us or important to us in our urban spaces in metro regions are not the same solutions that are important in rural areas of the state. We have different priorities and different ways of getting around and different needs and different points of access. And that's also important. So we need to be nuanced about it. And there's room to be talking with our legislators and other policymakers about those nuances, and so that everyone appreciates in the conversation that we understand each other a little bit.
I'll just add a quick comment, kind of stepping aside from the, health literature, because as you said, there's plenty of evidence. And just kind of, my personal perspective on this for a little bit. One of the reasons I do the work I do is because I care about health and, the environment, and I want to help our whole state, care about that as well. And I've been involved in bicycle transportation and pedestrian transportation for a long time. And one of the things I wish people knew, and I wish we could convey, and maybe all of our social media tools can help us do this, is it is fun to ride a bike. It is joyful to ride a bike. And so often in our society, we think we want to be comfortable, we want to be in our cars, we want to be the same temperature all the time. It is invigorating to ride a bike on a cold day, and I just wish we could convey that a little bit more effectively, and people could tap into some of that joy. And the same could be said for walking. So I just wish we could tap into that a little bit more and help our communities spread that joy.
I love it. Joy. Spread the joy. I think there was a question back there. Yeah.
Question for you, Jen, if that's okay.
Oh, gosh, no. Go ahead.
Can you talk more about how the clean transportation plan effort is dealing with issues of VMT reduction and equity? I understand so far it is focused a lot on sort of the clean air piece of it, but can you tell us more about the VMT and the clean, cleaner, cleanest options that are, everything above and beyond EVs?
Yeah, really good question. So what we've done, as I mentioned, there were 3,300 different comments and solutions that came through from our stakeholders, including the VMT work group. What we're doing is kind of refining those down into some core principles that we want to bring forward and prioritize. And many of them actually were ones that you just heard on the panel. And so what we're doing is representing what all the stakeholders that have been so engaged with this over the last year, what they would like to see move forward, and what are those strategies, and how do we together, working together, move them forward. I think actually, Abaya, you brought up some things that maybe weren't as much in there, and so I'll work with the team to include some of those because you brought up some really good points. But my point is, this isn't something that the DOT can do by itself. Certainly, there are certain things that the agency can look at, and local governments and planning organizations. But this is something that all of us together need to do. And the Clean Transportation Plan is designed to do that, to bring everybody together to figure out how we together move it all forward. And so, this panel is an excellent representation of that. This brings together, we've got the state, we've got a local government, and we've got an organization that's working very hard on these issues, working together, and you can see the similarities. So when we all work together, we're going to make it happen. So the plan is to come out and have those actionable strategies that we can work on together. That may not have answered your question, but I'm hoping it did. That's what the plan is. So yeah, and I meant to mention that before. So a draft of it will come out on March 1st, to give everyone time to look at it. You give 2 weeks. Give us your feedback. Did we capture everything? Did we miss anything? Is there anything else on your mind? Certainly we had 300 people participate, but this is not everyone, right? So that will go out for public comment on March 1st. And then it's due to the governor on April 7th, of this year, 2023. Doesn't stop there though. We kick off then additional work groups. We're going to work together, regularly come back together, look at those actionable strategies, look at what we're successful in, look at what we're not successful in, revise our strategies and move together forward. So it's not going to stop on April 7th, but that's the date that you'll see the final report.
My question is about the private sector. Yesterday, we heard about the Toyota battery plant coming and all the jobs that they're bringing in, VinFast. Where is the private sector responsibility in all of this to reduce VMT? What onus is being put on them to get their employees out to their plants? We love the economic development. We love the jobs that are coming, but where is that private sector tie-in to helping to solve this problem?
Is that working? Okay. Thanks for the question. It's really important. I think private sector, and by private sector, I mean really all large employers, have an incredibly important role to play. And I'll just give one very easy example that's always on my mind as an employee in my real job, in my day job. I work at Duke University and have for many years. And Duke, several years ago, began essentially 100% subsidizing public transit for all employees. In other words, I could ride the bus anywhere in the Triangle, any day of the week, anytime I wanted, on Duke's dime. And that's an employee subsidy that's benefit available to all Duke employees. Or this was pre-pandemic, of course. Now so many people shifted to home, and our regional transit system went fare free for a little while, hopefully longer. But I think that sort of role in private employers in participating in that kind of transportation demand management is really important and can have a big impact, especially large employers like Duke and others around the state. I want to bring this back though to the responsibility of local governments to employers to help make that happen. And the reason that employers are locating where they locate is because governments tell them where they can locate through our zoning and land use policies, right? So we talked a little bit about that earlier. I also think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but that it is currently state law does not authorize local governments to require employers to participate in transportation demand management strategies. That's a legislative change that could be made by our legislature. So there are things like that that we in the government side have to change in our planning and our policymaking to allow employers to participate in these strategies.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I want to go back to the idea around the communities really owning the plan. It's their plan, and really get some thoughts on how to do that, because I feel like a lot of folks in the audience here in general, they're transportation professionals. So they may be involved in the planning of project development, either as a state, federal employee, a consultant. And I'm a little concerned that maybe unintentionally and through our processes of public engagement, we might in some ways challenge or become a barrier to that community really owning the plan. Because it is, here are the feds, here are the state coming in with their plan that they're required to do. So my question is, what is then the role of your state DOT and your feds and that group in this planning process? How do we really facilitate it becoming owned by that community?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. The role of DOTs and MPOs is important. We're not suggesting that y'all need to be boxed out. You all bring some important things to the table: financial resources, technical expertise, some parameters. All of those are important. What needs to happen is the agencies need to financially support Black and Brown-led organizations at the neighborhood level to allow us to participate. Black and Brown-led organizations are stretched. We are stretched at the neighborhood level. We are addressing violence. We're wanting to improve our schools. We're want to create more economic opportunities. And, transportation is not one of those areas where at the neighborhood level, Black people are fully engaged in. So since you want us to be at the table, we need financial resources to be there. So I want to ask a quick question. How many people work for a DOT or MPO? Okay, of the people who work for a DOT or MPO, did you know that U.S. DOT federal funds are able to be passed through to community-based organizations? Okay, I see a few head nods. Those funds can go to community-based organizations. Now, it's not easy. There's some challenges for cities, DOTs to do that. However, the funds are able to be used that way. What we don't want is for you to give us a gift card when we show up to your meeting and you ask us to, approve your plan. We want financial resources for Black and Brown-led organizations to be at the table as a full partner. When you got an idea, when you wake up and you got an idea about a plan, you should be on the phone with us. We got an idea. Let's get together. Let's talk about it. And then we are in ownership. We are sharing the financial resources. We are sharing the power. We are sharing the decision making. And from beginning to end, we are a full partner on that process. It's Black and Brown-led organizations. It's Black, Brown, and Indigenous people at the neighborhood level that are going to ensure that your project, our collective project, is going to have an impact at the neighborhood level. I don't trust y'all. I trust me, and I trust my neighbor, and I trust the community-based organizations that I work with, because your sector has built monuments to racism. Y'all know what we call those monuments today? Highways.
An example, and there are alternatives out there. I just want to mention that too. There is community first planning going on in our communities, and I think holding up those models as examples is important as well. And Michael Parker from Chapel Hill knows that several years ago, Carrboro and Chapel Hill together engaged a local planning firm that does focus on community first planning and insists that in any planning effort that happens, it starts at the neighborhood level. And this was planning effort that was meant to directly impact a historically Black neighborhood in Carrboro and Chapel Hill. This firm was engaged to do that work and insisted from the beginning that co-facilitation had to happen in partnership with a local Black-led community organization that many of you may know in Chapel Hill, called the Marion Cheek Jackson Center, which is a community building organization in Chapel Hill. And they were leading that process in partnership with the neighbors themselves, right? So everything that came out of the process was informed by the priorities, the goals, the vision of the folks who actually live in the neighborhood today. And so I think there are examples for us to hold up even in our own communities here in the Triangle and to build on.
Thank you. Great question and great responses. Thank you. I'm going off script, Jamie. Sorry. It's time for one more question. This has been a really good discussion. I want to make sure we're getting your questions answered.
Thanks. I want to thank the panel for a great discussion. And to the mayor's last comment, that plan that you discussed, did Carrboro adopt it as an amendment to their comprehensive development plan?
For the question, the plan was completed. That planning process was completed before we engaged in and completed our comp plan process, but it is sort of subsumed within. I will say the immediate effect was that in both Chapel Hill and Carrboro, both councils adopted new zoning regulations and districts in our communities as a direct result of that planning process. So there are, for example, in Carrboro, I don't remember the specifics on the Chapel Hill side, but we created and applied 2 new zoning districts in that historically Black neighborhood that had been created and built on the work of the neighborhood itself. So it led directly to some policy change. And I think that's important. But I think in my mind, what's even more important is I hope that we will be using that model in our future efforts that are talked about in our comp plan. For example, some small area plans that we're hoping to do in Carrboro sometime in the near future that I think need to be done at this neighborhood level and driven by neighbors living in those neighborhoods.
All right, great. Thank you. I wish we could keep going on. I don't know how much availability you have afterwards. I know Obayi has to take off for a flight, but certainly he provided his contact information. Please feel free to get in touch. I did want to mention the poll. Overwhelmingly over 50%. Yes, thank you, Jamie, my lovely assistant. Over 50% selected C, enhancing linkages between land use and transportation in long-range planning and project development. And Mayor Stiles, you definitely brought that up in your discussion as well. So certainly something for us all to be considering when we're doing planning at the community level. I want to leave it, you can reflect on that response, or just is there anything that we missed, anything that you'd like to share before we leave this lovely audience?
I'll just say that like any good panel, I feel like I learned a lot from my co-panelists and I'm really glad I was able to be here for it. So thank you. And I want both of your slides. Appreciate it.
I'll just say that regarding environmental justice, there is a lot of momentum around seeking equitable solutions right now. And there are some great tools out there. I know tools don't solve the problems, but, I mentioned the CDC EJ Index. Our own DOT here in North Carolina has a great equity tool. In our branch, we're working on an environmental health data dashboard to try to bring in that health piece a little bit more. So there are great tools out there, and anyone who's interested and wants to use them to inform their work, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help try to connect you.
Should you be committed to racial equity, mobility justice, environmental justice, and you're comfortable, you're not doing your job. That commitment requires transformation. When there's a commitment to those frameworks, it should transform your agency. It should shape your decision-making. It should shape how you distribute resources. It should shape how you work with neighborhoods. It should shape how you plan projects. It should transform your agency. And without that transformation, your commitment is empty.
Just letting that sit for a second. Equity plus power. I really like the way that he ended his discussion today, and thank you, Obai. Well, that wraps it up. This has been a wonderful session. Thank you to the three panelists. Just incredible information and insights, and really giving us a lot of things to think about together. And to the question before about the Clean Transportation Plan, we want to weave all this into it. So please go away from here today with your ideas, your thoughts on how we can do that together, how we can move this all forward together. I have to do a couple of technical things. Actually, first, I want to thank Jamie Kreitzer from NCDOT for helping to plan all this, organize this, and Kim Meyer from SELC for helping us get the great panelists. So thank you both for your help with this panel. I'd also like to take a minute to thank our corporate sponsor, NC Go. You've seen them a couple times throughout the summit for hosting the 2023 North Carolina Transportation Summit, and all the sponsors who helped make this happen today. If you haven't done so, and I know you're going to go do it right now because you're hungry and lunch is going to be served down there, please go visit our exhibit hall and visit all those vendors that are down here, bringing all their great services to each and every one of us. And also while you're down there, make sure you visit NCDOT's Office of Civil Rights Business Development Zone. This is a great way to get people engaged, the workforce. We didn't talk a lot about it today, but certainly want to get people trained into the workforce for either VMT reduction or other types of clean transportation or other transportation modes. Let's see, there's information for those of you that need to log professional development hours. Credit forms are going to be emailed to each of you that have registered. If you can self-report those hours. If you haven't registered, make sure you stop by the front desk on your way out to obtain your credit. We are now breaking for lunch. My stomach didn't growl. Usually it does about this time. So thank you for that. Please, 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 join me in giving these panelists a round of applause. And thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your summit.